In 1325, two Italian cities declared war on each other. It is, by most accounts, one of the strangest declarations of war ever recorded. The reason was a wooden bucket. They fought, bled, and argued over that bucket and everything underneath it for 40 years. This is the full story. Now, your first instinct is probably to laugh. Medieval people, right? Absolute idiots, fighting over home goods. Here's the thing, they weren't really fighting over the bucket. Not at first, anyway. By the time that bucket became an international incident, there was already 100 years of religious war, city-state rivalry, and extremely personal animosity sitting underneath these two cities, pressurized, waiting. The bucket didn't create any of that. It just lit the room. And once you understand what was actually going on beneath the surface, the Pope, the Emperor, the fruit cutting, the feathers, and a grudge that neither side had any real interest in ending, the bucket stops looking like a joke and starts looking like the most logical conclusion in the entire story, which genuinely is so much worse. To understand why Bologna and Modena went to war over a bucket in 1325, we need to go back roughly 5 centuries. Don't worry, it moves fast and it gets stupid very quickly. In the year 800, the Pope and Charlemagne, king of the Franks, soon to be emperor of the West, made a deal. Charlemagne would protect the church, the Pope would crown him emperor, lending the whole operation a divine authority that being very good at conquering people simply couldn't provide on its own. Clean arrangement, everybody wins. Except this created an immediate structural problem that nobody thought to address before signing. Who is actually in charge here? The Pope, whose blessing gives the emperor his legitimacy, or the emperor, whose army protects the Pope and whose territory covers half of Europe? Neither side wanted to say power, both sides were absolutely talking about power. For the next 300 years, popes and emperors traded blows over one specific question: who gets to appoint church officials? Bishops and abbots controlled land, they collected taxes, they commanded armies. They were, functionally, local governors who happened to wear robes. If the emperor chose who became bishop, he controlled the church from the inside. If the pope chose, same outcome, opposite direction. This conflict was called the investiture controversy, a name that sounds like a corporate financial scandal, which is honestly pretty accurate. It never got resolved cleanly. Instead, it metastasized into Italian society in a way that stopped being about the Pope or the Emperor and became something far more immediate, something personal, and something that would eventually, through a chain of events involving a fort, a river crossing, and a cavalry charge, produce a bucket dispute that is technically still open today. Every city in northern Italy picked a side. The Guelphs backed the Pope. Wealthy trading cities mostly, merchant families who didn't want an emperor controlling their supply chains or their very profitable arrangements with the church. People with money to protect. The Ghibellines backed the emperor. More agricultural, more territorial, more threatened by the expanding papal states quietly swallowing land near their borders. People who looked at the Pope's growing real estate portfolio and felt something shift uncomfortably in their stomach. And here is where it gets properly strange. Because once you picked a side, you committed to it, in ways that look immediately recognizable if you don't examine them too closely. Guelph families cut their fruit crosswise. Ghibellines cut it straight down. Guelphs wore hat feathers on the right, Ghibellines on the left. Guelphs used chased goblets at dinner. Ghibellines used smooth ones. The battlements on your tower announced your politics. The direction you sliced an apple told everyone in the room which side of a 200-year theological argument about ecclesiastical appointments you were on. This is not a medieval problem. This is a tribalism problem in period costume. The specifics are different. The mechanism is identical. Cities fought cities. Families inside the same city fought each other for control. Some cities switched sides when leadership changed, and managed as a result to be hated by everyone simultaneously. Right in the middle of all of it, Modena and Bologna. Modena, Ghibelline, emperor loyal, agricultural, proud of it. Bologna, Guelph, Pope supporting, prosperous, also proud of it. They shared a river, a border, and somewhere north of a century of bad blood. In 1225, they fought at the Battle of Fossalta, And when Bologna won, they celebrated by launching a live donkey over Modena's city walls as a victory message. Not a letter, not a banner, a donkey. So by 1325, we are not dealing with two neutral parties who stumbled into a disagreement. We are dealing with two cities that have been building toward another collision for decades. The tension didn't need a cause, it needed a trigger, something concrete, something that could be pointed at and taken personally. The bucket was going to provide that. It just needed to show up. Here is how it actually started, which is not how most people tell it. In 1325, Bologna had two fortified positions protecting the city from the southwest, serious military infrastructure. The reason an enemy force simply couldn't decide on a Tuesday morning to walk up to the gates. These forts were the whole defensive strategy. One of Bologna's own commanders at the first fort, for reasons the historical record describes with impressive diplomatic restraint as ideological sympathy, handed the fort over to Modena. He just opened the gate, switched sides. Done. Bologna declared war. They assembled a force significantly larger than anything Modena could put together. The numbers were decisively in Bologna's favor. The plan was straightforward: retake the fort, hold the river line, conclude the matter. Simple, methodical, done before the month was out. Modena recognized they were outnumbered and needed to do something unexpected. So one night, they sent a signal north, a false report of an attack further up the river. The Bolognese shifted their defensive line to respond, and the Modenese crossed the river further south, quietly, while everyone was looking the wrong way. It worked cleanly. But here's the move nobody anticipated. Instead of marching directly toward the contested fort, the thing Bologna had specifically deployed its entire army to protect, Modena turned and went for the second fort at Zappalino, the one everyone had assumed was safe. Bologna couldn't absorb losing both positions. The entire Bolognese force repositioned to Zappalino. It was late afternoon, maybe 2 hours of daylight remaining. The army was still settling in, moving, disorganized, not yet ready. Standard medieval protocol at this exact moment: both sides make camp. You rest, you eat, you fight properly at dawn when the field is visible and everyone has their breakfast. Modena did not do that. It is May 1325. You are a Bolognese commander. You have more soldiers. You have a strong position. You are watching the Modenese across the field, smaller force, arrived late, clearly tired. And you are thinking, tomorrow this is over. Then they move, not into camp, toward you directly, right now while you are still mid-formation. Then you hear the cavalry coming around the flank. The Bolognese line collapsed, casualties in the thousands. What remained of the force ran, and the Modenese cavalry followed them most of the way back to the city gates. By any measure, it was a complete, decisive, and deeply humiliating defeat. And now, here is where the bucket arrives, which is not where you were told it would arrive. After the battle, Modena did not press the advantage. No siege, no terms, no demands. What they did instead was set up camp right outside the walls of Bologna and throw a party for 3 days. Bonfires, celebration, right there in full view of the people watching from the ramparts above. On day 4, they packed up and started home. And as they passed the public well on the way out, someone looked at the bucket, looked at their friends, looked back at the bucket, took it. Not because it was valuable, not because Modena was experiencing a bucket shortage, but because Bologna was still watching from those walls, and had been watching for 3 days, and Modena wanted to make sure that every single person inside that city understood exactly how the weekend had gone. They had camped outside your front gate. They had celebrated for 3 days straight. They had left on their own schedule. And they took your bucket on the way out, because why not? What are you going to do? Nothing. That is what. The bucket was a message. The message was, this is what losing to us looks like. Bologna demanded it back immediately. Modena put it on display in the cathedral. If you're enjoying this and you want more stories where documented reality is simply not trying very hard to be believable, subscribe. It helps the channel grow. And there's more of this. A peace settlement arrived a few months after the battle. Bologna agreed to pay war reparations. Modena agreed to return the territories it had taken. All very civilized, both cities behaving outwardly like adults. Nobody put the bucket in the treaty. Whether this was a deliberate omission on Modena's part or a collective failure to take the bucket seriously enough to include it is genuinely unclear. What is clear is that once the ink dried, the bucket became a separate matter, and Modena had absolutely no interest in revisiting it. The larger conflict surrounding all of this, the broader Guelph-Ghibelline War, the Pope versus Emperor argument that had made both cities' hatred structurally possible in the first place, ground on for another 40 years. Cities changed hands, alliances dissolved and reformed, the Emperor's influence in Italy shifted, the Pope issued declarations. Nothing fundamentally changed because nothing fundamentally could change. The underlying tension was no longer about territory or taxation or even church appointments. It was about identity. Both sides had spent so long defining themselves against the other that the opposition had become the entire point. Remove it, and nobody knows what they're for anymore. The bucket moved from the cathedral to the city hall, then eventually to a glass case in the Herlindina Tower where it sits today. There is, at this point, one detail that feels almost too perfect to be real. Historians debate whether the current bucket on display in that tower is the original bucket or a replica installed for preservation reasons, while the actual bucket is stored safely somewhere else. There may be a decoy bucket. Of course there's a decoy bucket. Bologna has formally requested the return of the bucket. Not once, multiple times, through official channels, in writing, with appropriate diplomatic language that manages somehow to be about a wooden bucket while sounding entirely serious. Modena has formally declined every time. The two cities maintain a semi-regular tradition of staging a reenactment of the Battle of Zoppolino, full medieval costumes, mock combat, thousands of spectators, an atmosphere that is technically a cultural festival and emotionally a 700-year grudge continuing to operate at reduced intensity. The war ended in the 14th century. The argument did not end. It became a tradition. And here is what the story's actually about. Not the battle, not the Guelph-Ghibelline split, not even the Pope and the Emperor arguing about bishops. It is about the fact that when two groups have organized their identity around opposing each other, conflict does not need a real cause. It needs an object, something that can be stolen and displayed and formally requested and formally refused for 7 centuries, while everyone involved quietly understands that it was never really about the object. The bucket was not the cause, it was the souvenir. And the reason Bologna still wants it back, that very specific expression crosses the face of someone from Bologna when you bring it up, that look of a person who has accepted the loss intellectually and has not made peace with it emotionally, is that everyone knows the bucket was never about the bucket. It was about being right, about making the other side remember losing, about the small, durable satisfaction of still having the thing after 700 years. The bucket is still in Modena. Bologna never got it back. They never fought over the bucket. They fought, and then they took the bucket, because that's what you do when you want someone to remember losing forever. It worked. Next on screen, Fritz Haber, the most controversial scientist in history, the man who figured out how to feed 2 billion people and invented the weapon used to kill 1 million of them in the same decade. Thanks for watching, and see you there.